Yordenis Ugas says that there's not going to be no Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. because I'm going to bring those belts back home and I'm going to make history in Cuba. Let's talk about it in this video. King Jr. got another video for y'all. So, Yordenis Ugas saw everything with Errol Spence Jr. with the new tattoo. By the way, Errol Spence tattoo is fire, the big fish. But anyway, Yordenis Ugas says that he's going to interrupt the fight that everybody wants to see, the matchup between Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. Yordenis Ugas does have a chance of upsetting Errol Spence Jr. if he can, but I just don't think that Yordenis Ugas is going to have enough in the gas tank to beat a guy like Errol Spence Jr. According to Marvelous Jarvis, Errol Spence Jr. got stronger, his ring IQ went up, and he's more of a deadly puncher. And I think Yordenis Ugas is going to be in trouble. If we get the version of Errol Spence that fought Shawn Porter, Chris Algieri, Lamont Peterson, and the rest of those guys that Errol Spence Jr. fought, not the one when Errol Spence Jr. was coming off that car accident earlier throughout his career against Danny Garcia. I'm talking about the previous, before those guys. Errol Spence Jr. is going to looking to get Yordenis Ugas out of there. And I think Errol Spence Jr. is going to have all three of those belts. But Yordenis Ugas, I have to admire his confidence that he thinks he can beat Errol Spence Jr. When you got high confidence like Yordenis Ugas, anything can happen in the sport of boxing. Yordenis Ugas has a high ring IQ, high boxing ability, and he's very patient on his punches. So we're going to have to see if Errol Spence Jr. can time Yordenis Ugas, because Yordenis Ugas is very hard to time. He's very patient on his punches. He's a decent counter puncher. You know, Yordenis Ugas comes from that old school Cuban style of boxing, so he has all the boxing tools in the world to beat Errol Spence Jr. But I feel like that Errol Spence is going to win the fight. But Yordenis Ugas says that he's going to be 100% sure that he's going to beat Errol Spence Jr. And he also stated that he wants Crawford not to duck him because Crawford needs to sign with the PBC and it'll be easy to make that fight happen. So Yordenis Ugas is looking for all the smoke, and Yordenis Ugas does not have time on his side as well. He doesn't have time for the games. He's 35, turning 36 this year. So Yordenis Ugas is getting older, but we're going to see the absolutely best version of Yordenis Ugas in this fight with Errol Spence Jr. Now, the Yordenis Ugas that showed up against Shawn Porter, that Yordenis Ugas, which people thought he really won the fight, but I don't see how Shawn Porter really won that fight. A lot of people had Ugas winning that fight, but if that version of Ugas showed up against Shawn Porter, I think Ugas could have a chance of beating Errol Spence Jr. But does Ugas has the respectable amounts of power to keep Errol Spence Jr. off of him all night in his chest first? We got to see how good Yordenis Ugas ring IQ. If Yordenis Ugas can keep Errol Spence Jr. off him all night long with a great jab that Yordenis Ugas have, Errol Spence Jr. could be in trouble, or Yordenis Ugas could be in trouble. But with that being said, Yordenis Ugas says that he's guaranteed that Errol Spence is going to lose. This is a legacy fight for him to make history for his Cuban fighters, learning, the Cuban nation, to make history for his people, and he's guaranteeing that he's going to beat Errol Spence Jr. and then coming for Crawford next, and maybe potentially Ugas could be undisputed. It's a small chance, but we have to give him a small chance. You guys know what I mean, a small chance that he could get undisputed, and he could be one of the best welterweights if he beats Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. With that being said, guys, it is what it is. Make sure you like, subscribe, and comment. This is your boy King Jr. I'm out of here. Peace.